So today we are going to be talking about some of the different types of long-term memory. And so based on research, it appears that our long-term memory, it's not just sort of this one dimensional system, but rather that it's made up of a number of various subsystems. Um, and so the first major distinction that we're going to talk about today is between what is called our declarative and our non-declarative memory. We're going to talk about declarative memory first, and we will pick up on non-declarative memory on Friday. So let's go ahead and talk about that. What is declarative memory? So this is also referred to as explicit memory, or you might even see it referred to as conscious memory. Um, they're all the same thing. Um, and this idea of declarative memory, it's our factual knowledge about the world and ourselves that we can declare or consciously pull out of our memory. And so within declarative memory, there are two subtypes. There are two different subcategories that we are going to talk about, and we'll nuance the differences between. So the two subtypes are semantic memory and episodic memory. And so the knowledge that we have about facts and events is called semantic memory. So I like to think of this category of memory as trivia memory or Jeopardy memory. So for example, knowing that it takes 8 minutes for sunlight to reach the earth, or knowing that Abraham Lincoln was president during the Civil War, or that Rome is the capital of Italy. And so this memory, it holds information that it doesn't have a particular um, time or place, what we call referent or an anchor. So when you are recalling this kind of information, you're not recalling how old you were when you first learned it. You aren't recalling the specific context in which you learned it, right? I don't know how I know the fact that it takes 8 minutes for sunlight to reach the earth. I just know that. Um, I don't know when I first learned that Abraham Lincoln was the president during the American Civil War. I just know that outside of any sort of space or time references. Um, and so again, the semantic memory it's our general world knowledge. So again, it's our memory for facts that are not specific to us. They're facts that other people know, and that again don't have any sort of time-based context to them or place-based context to them in terms of you remembering, yes, I remember in the second grade I learned I don't know, what do you learn in the second grade? Yeah, in the second grade I learned that um, Lewis and Clark um, explored America and found the Pacific Ocean. That second grade might be a little bit too early for that. But anyway, I'll just say you understand what I mean, hopefully. So let's move on to another kind of declarative memory. And this is called episodic memory. And so this is our autobiographical memory for the quote unquote episodes of what has happened in our lives. So that's how I like to think about it. Like, oh, my episodic memory is sort of the episode by episode narrative of what I've gone through. And so this is the memory storage that I draw on when I recall that I went ice skating for my 7th birthday party, or that I went to East Beach with my friends last week, which didn't happen, but maybe happened for several of you, and I hope that's the case. Or the fact that I won the spelling bee in the 5th grade. And if you remember flashbulb memories, that is those memories that are really vivid and personal, usually highly emotional um, as well. These are a kind of autobiographical memory, right? These are these very, very strong, vivid um, memories of something that happened to us or that we were involved in. Um, and so our episodic memory is useful for organizing and storing information that not only pertains to um, each of us as individuals, but that also has a really distinctive time referent, or again, an anchor. You can think of this as having some sort of like time tag to it. So, for example, the question of, well, what did you eat for lunch yesterday? Um, the you is, of course, if I'm posing this to one of you, right, it's calling on you to not only access your autobiographical memories, but specifically the autobiographical memory of what did you have for lunch yesterday? So that yesterday is cueing you to go back to a particular um, time in your life and asking about a particular experience that you had at that time. Another sort of example would be, well, who is the first person that you saw this morning? Um, and so, again, our episodic memory has not only the sort of personal tag to it, but also a time tag as well. And a famous cognitive researcher named Tolving, he argued for this distinction between semantic and episodic memory um, based on some differences in the characteristics of these two memory subsystems. Um, so here we kind of start to see this shift from just the general concept of, oh, well, there are these two different modes of declarative memory. And Tolving here, his work kind of fleshed out those differences more so. We're able to have more detailed ways of differentiating between semantic and episodic memories. So let's talk about some of these characteristics. So in comparison to our semantic memories, our our fact-based memories, our episodic memories, our autobiographical memories are ones that often have a strong feeling of recollection to them. Um, Whereas in comparison, when we're accessing information from our semantic system, we're not really aware of that same, so we don't really have that same sort of recollection aspect to it, or you can think of it as sort of like the reliving of that memory, like we do with episodic memories. So, and again, this is because there's this idea that there's no time or location that is associated with that information. So when I recall going to East Beach with my friends last week, not only am I pulling that up in my memory, but I'm also sort of re-experiencing it as I'm recalling, what the sun felt like, what we did. Maybe we played volleyball and then we ate the picnic lunch that we brought. Um, versus I don't really have that sort of experience of reliving or re-experiencing um, the fact that sunlight takes 8 minutes to get to Earth. There's nothing sort of um, that I'm re-experiencing with that other than, oh yeah, I know that fact. So another characteristic that we see that differentiates semantic and episodic memory is that our episodic memories are more likely to be forgotten, whereas our semantic memories are not. And so we see this as a natural part of the aging process, right? Just it doesn't have anything to do with like, oh, Alzheimer's or, anything, any sort of dementia or anything like that, but it is just a natural part of the aging process, right? So for example, like the memories of the names and the faces of the people that you went to high school with, they start to become more blurry, more difficult to remember. Um, and that happens as you continue to age, whereas you're probably still going to be likely to tell me that the Declaration of Independence was written in 1776, if that's something that you've known your whole life. So maybe you learned that information at the same while you were in high school, and that is information that you are continuing to hang on to, you're continuing to remember. Whereas your episodic memories, those are going to decay over time. So another distinction that we want to make is that um, our episodic memories are often um, accompanied by some sort of emotional component to them in comparison to semantic memories. So again, going back to my hypothetical example of going to East Beach with my friends, when I think about that, there are emotions that come up, right? I might have been really happy and excited to see my friends. Maybe there was a sense of calm associated with that day. Maybe it was the first day off that I've had in a while, and it just felt so nice and so relaxing. In comparison to, yeah, again, going back to my my semantic memory of the Declaration of Independence, right? That doesn't bring up any type of emotions in me. I don't think that the thought of the Declaration of Independence in 1776 and things like that necessarily bring up emotion in a lot of people. It's just sort of like, yeah, I feel neutral about that. I don't have any kind of emotional experience that accompanies that. And then another aspect, and again, this kind of ties back to um, our experience of recalling that memory. With our episodic memories, we are essentially kind of re-experiencing them in our minds when we recall them. And so that often means that the sensory components of that memory come along with us too. So things like how the beach smelled, the sea salt, the feel of the ocean spray on my face, the brightness of the sun, the sound of the seagulls and things like that. So again, in comparison to our more boring fact about the Declaration of Independence being written in 1776, I don't have any kind of sensory memory. I don't have any sort of, oh, I was feeling really cold or warm when I learned that fact, or I remember how the room smelled when I learned that, right? We don't have that. And then finally, our episodic memories are going to be more context specific, um, meaning that our semantic memories are generally going to be sort of more useful or sort of generalizable over a variety of different situations and contexts. Whereas our episodic memories, again, are very context specific. You are going to be drawing on your semantic memories probably across different scenarios, right? You're recalling again, going back to the factoid of the Declaration of Independence, whether you are watching Jeopardy or playing a trivia pursuit or taking an American history test, or maybe you're listening to a historical podcast or something like that, right? There are instances where that is going to be um, information that kind of um, cross cuts a number of areas in your life. Whereas recalling that one time that you went to East Beach with friends, right? That's going to be really specific. There aren't going to be as many situations in which it's going to be relevant for you to recall that information. And so just again, another way to kind of think about this is that our episodic memories are really context specific, whereas our semantic memories are not. And so, as always in cognitive, we can also see evidence for this and by this I mean the distinction between episodic and semantic memory in the form of instances where people have sustained brain damage. And so there's a man at the beginning of the chapter. Um, his name is, well, his initials are KC. That's how he's referred to in the literature. And your book talks about what happened to him. And so when he was 30, he was riding his motorcycle. He lost control of it when he was coming off of the freeway, and he was involved in a really bad crash that damaged his hippocampus and also some of the surrounding structures that are really important to hippocampal functioning. And so as a result of this, he lost his episodic memory. So he didn't remember anything that happened to him in the past. You might remember that the more cognitive jargon for that is retrograde amnesia. However, interestingly enough, his semantic memories remained intact. And so he still knew facts such as the fact of, well, utensils for eating are kept in the kitchen. He knew the difference between a spare and a strike in bowling, right? So he still remembered information that he had learned before the accident. It's not like he was retaught the difference between a spare and a strike in bowling as part of his rehabilitation process following the accident. So that was information that he learned before the accident, but it wasn't information that was personally related to him. And so we saw the opposite pattern of memory loss. So that is episodic memory stayed intact, but semantic memory was damaged. In the case of an Italian woman who experienced something called encephalitis, this is essentially inflammation of the brain, and it's often the result of an infection. It's not tied to any specific sort of infection like the flu or strep or anything like that. But it can be due to any sort of viral infection that crosses the what's called the blood-brain barrier and essentially is able to directly impact the brain. And so for this woman, her initial symptoms of the encephalitis was headaches and a fever, and then things got a lot more severe, and she started having hallucinations for about 5 days. And so that just really sort of showed the severity of the infection. And sadly, the result of this viral attack on her brain was that she wasn't able to recognize pictures of like her favorite celebrities or other notable public figures. She couldn't remember the meaning of words that were on her shopping list or where things were in the store. She couldn't recall historical information, which I've represented here on the slide, like the fact that Italy had been involved in World War II. And this is something that, as an Italian, she would have known. She also wouldn't be able to tell you that on the right that this is Beethoven and what Beethoven is famous for as being a famous composer. However, she could remember what she had done during the day and things that had happened weeks or months before the encephalitis. So again, the memories that were attached to her specifically in terms of her autobiographical memories, those remained intact. But just one of the unfortunate consequences of this viral infection is that her semantic memory was totally wiped out. However, I do want to point out that sort of this distinction between semantic and episodic memory, it's not as nice and neat as we might think or hope for. Um, so we're going to talk about now a brain injury case that didn't have such neat and tidy differentiations between episodic and semantic memory, which was the case with Casey and the Italian woman that we just talked about. Also, I'm calling her the Italian woman because I don't know, I couldn't find her name in the literature, and also they didn't have her initials that they used to refer to her. So, apologies to her. I would use her name or initials if I guess she wanted me to, or the researchers. Anyway, all to say, I'm just going to keep calling her the Italian woman. Apologies to her. With the case of a man named Clive Waring, um, we got some support for the idea that there isn't a single location of episodic memory in the brain that is then separate from semantic memory. So it's not like, we have one separate storage locker for all of our episodic memories, and then in an adjacent but separate storage locker, we have all of our semantic memories. But rather that we have a number of widespread pathways throughout the brain that are involved in the storage and retrieval of both kinds of memory that likely have some sort of overlap to them. And so in the case of Clive, he also experienced encephalitis when he was 47, and he lost his episodic memory. And what was interesting about his case was that he, although he was able to remember some semantic-based knowledge, so for example, like the names of different foods, so like chicken, pork, beef, like if I had showed him this picture, he would be able to accurately name those pieces of meat. But he wasn't able to remember what chicken tastes like. He wasn't able to remember pork. He wasn't able to remember beef. If you gave him a blind taste test of these foods, he wouldn't be able to accurately identify what he was eating. And so here we see, pardon me, here we see the interaction that can sometimes occur between our episodic and our semantic memories for certain instances where our knowledge of something is connected to our personal experience of that item or to that event. So in the case of Clive, it's one thing to know, in quotes, that is, to be able to name a piece of chicken and to recognize that it is something that is separate from beef, right? We are with our semantic memory, we can say, oh, that is a fact that I know, that I have experienced. Let me go ahead and pull it out and tell it to you. However, it's an entirely different sort of thing to have personal experience of eating these foods and personally knowing the difference between the tastes and textures and so on of chicken and beef. And so we also have some brain imaging studies that have also, again, supported this idea of there being a distinction between semantic and episodic memory, but not so clear cut of a distinction as some of the earlier models in like the 70s and 80s in cognitive psychology were predicting about semantic memory and episodic memory. And so there have been some brain imaging studies that have shown differences in brain activation depending on the type of information that the person is processing or that they're presented with. And so Levine et al. In 2004 asked participants to record everyday events, so at their episodic experiences, and also the facts of their world knowledge, so their semantic memory, using an audio recorder. So essentially, they were just sort of keeping an audio diary, I guess, of the things that were happening throughout the day. Um, I'm not sure how exactly they prompted participants for their semantic knowledge. Seems like that would be more difficult to just tell people of like, okay, well, whenever you have a, trivia fact that comes to mind, just record it. But anyway, all to say, they were able to to distinguish between the recordings of episodic information and recordings of semantic information. And then what they had participants do was listen back to the recordings that they had made while they were in an MRI machine. And so Levine and colleagues found that the activation of different types of information, so the presentation of episodic versus semantic information, actually resulted in different patterns of brain activity. However, even though they were able to say, okay, distinctively, this is a pattern of brain activity that's different than this pattern, there are still some areas of overlap. And so there have also been some other studies that have given us evidence actually for this sort of what's called lateralization, sort of this uh, distinction between what goes on in the right hemisphere and what goes on in the left hemisphere. And so in this case, studies have shown that our brains show greater activation. That is, there's more activity in the left prefrontal lobe when participants were faced with semantic memory tasks. So, for example, when people were being asked to come up with verbs that were associated with particular nouns. So, saying drive as a verb that's associated with the noun car. Um, and there seemed to then be a different pattern of activity that happened in the right prefrontal cortex when somebody was engaging in an episodic memory task. So, as another example, our very popular research paradigm in cognitive psychology of recalling a list of words. So, you're recalling a list of words that you have been presented, that you can think back to. Oh yeah, it was about 15 minutes ago, I was sitting in this red chair and you were sitting across from me as the experimenter in that black chair, and you were reading those words off to me and I was trying to learn them. And so again, we see some sort of lateralization. We see some sort of hemispheric differences in terms of the side of the brain that becomes more active in certain tasks. But again, we do have this evidence that there's still overlap. So that's where we will go ahead and end for today. I know that was a shorter lecture, but we will have a good amount to talk about on Friday. So I look forward to seeing you all then.